When I was 15, my dad passed away. It felt like my entire world had collapsed. He was the kind of person who had everything in order, meticulous, prepared, and organized to a fault. He even saved receipts from a decade ago, just in case. So, of course, he had his will completed well in advance, and it was written with absolute precision. Not long after his passing, my mom moved on quickly. I tried to understand. Maybe she was lonely, but it all felt rushed. One moment we were at my dad's funeral, and before I could even process my loss, she was talking about a new man named Rob. Suddenly he was in our living room, like he'd always been there. It all happened so fast that I barely had time to adjust. At first Rob seemed fine, but it never felt right. My dad's belongings were still all over the house. His chair, his tools, his favorite mug, and slowly they began to disappear. My mom would say, "We need space for Rob's things." And I'd think, why so fast? He's not even paying rent. To me, it felt like she was erasing my dad's presence, piece by piece. That hurt more than I can explain. A few months later, I learned about the inheritance. My dad's lawyer explained that everything was left to me. Nothing was left to my mom. Since they weren't married, she had no legal claim. Still, I was shocked. At 15, I suddenly owned properties and money. It was overwhelming. My mom pretended to be supportive, but I could see her frustration. She likely assumed she'd inherit something, but my dad's will left no room for challenges. He'd made sure of it. At first, she acted happy for me, but soon, she began hinting, asking if I'd share some of it with her. She even suggested I transfer one of the properties into her name, so Rob would feel secure and part of the family. To her, it was about making him comfortable. To me, it felt like she was prioritizing him over me. I reminded her that I couldn't touch any of it until I turned 21. Her reaction was pure anger. Even though she tried to hide it, she kept testing me, asking again and again if there was some way to transfer at least one property. Each time I told her no. Not only because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. That inheritance was my dad's way of looking out for me, and I wasn't about to give it away for Rob's benefit. Then came Rob's kids. My mom went out of her way to make them feel at home. They were fine, around 18 and 19, but she treated them differently than she treated me. I noticed it when they went on trips together. She'd always suggest I visit my grandparents instead. She never directly said, "Don't come," but it was clear she didn't want me there. I spent many weekends with my grandparents, who were wonderful, but it always stung to know my mom was building a new life without me. Looking back, I think my dad must have seen this coming. Why else would he have left everything to me and nothing to her? Maybe he knew the dynamic, or maybe he just wanted to protect my future. Either way, I was grateful, even if it made life with my mom complicated. By the time I turned 17, the tension with Rob had escalated. At first I ignored him. He was just my mom's boyfriend, but then he started acting like he was in charge. This was my dad's house, and here Rob was, moving in, setting rules, and talking down to me. He'd say things like, "You need to show respect," or "It's time you learned discipline." I couldn't believe it. He wasn't my dad, and he had no right to act like the house was his. So, I pushed back. Anytime he tried to play the authority figure, I reminded him it wasn't his house. I even gave him a nickname, John Conroy, just to annoy him. It worked. Our relationship turned into an ongoing clash. He'd make comments, I'd fire back, and my mom always tried to mediate. She'd insist Rob was just trying to help me grow up, but I knew it was about control. What made it worse was my mom taking his side more and more. She'd tell me I needed to accept Rob as part of the family. I told her the truth. This wasn't his house, and he couldn't pretend it was. She never wanted to hear it. Then one day, things exploded. Rob told me I needed to pull my weight in the house. I snapped, telling him, "You're not my dad, and this isn't your house." He lost his temper, and my mom stepped in, begging us to stop, but instead of backing me, she turned on me. asking why I couldn't just respect him. I asked her why I should, when he didn't respect me or my dad's memory. That argument was the breaking point. Rob stormed off, and my mom, looking exhausted, told me we couldn't keep living like this. Then she said it. I needed to leave. I waited for her to take it back, but she didn't. She told me Rob and his kids deserved to feel comfortable too, and this was our home, not just mine. I was stunned. My own mother was asking me to leave the house. My dad left me. She framed it as giving me space to cool down, but I knew it wasn't about me. It was about making life easier for Rob. I packed my things in a haze, not even knowing where I'd go. At 17, I couldn't afford my own place, and everything I owned was in that house. Thankfully, my grandparents stepped in. They'd always supported me, and without hesitation, they welcomed me into their home. My grandpa came to pick me up that evening. Sitting in his car, I stared out the window, numb. My own mom had chosen someone else's family over me. Moving in with my grandparents felt safe. They never made me feel like a burden. My grandpa told me, "You'll always have a place here. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." And honestly, I needed to hear that more than anything. After everything that happened with my mom, it felt reassuring to know I had real support behind me. Still, she would come by sometimes, acting as if nothing had happened. She'd say things like, "I love you, you know that, right? I just want things to stay peaceful." It seemed more like she was trying to ease her own conscience than make things better. I remember once she brought over a box of my old things, telling me I might want them at my grandparents' place. I just looked at her, thinking, "You want this to feel normal?" But it wasn't. She kept repeating that she had done what was best for everyone, that Rob needed space to feel at home, and that one day I'd understand. I'd just nod, but inside it felt like she was trying to justify her decisions. She'd tell me, "You'll always have a home with us when you're ready." And every time I heard it, I wanted to tell her the truth, that it wasn't my home anymore. It was Rob's. Seeing her was hard. She was supposed to be the one person I could count on, yet she had chosen a man she barely knew over her own son. Worse, she acted as though sending me away was somehow for my benefit, as if being pushed out would help me grow. Eventually, I stopped engaging during her visits. I'd stay polite, but I didn't let her explanations affect me anymore. Instead, I focused on school, my friends, and most importantly, my grandparents. They became my real family during that time. My grandmother often reminded me, "You've got us and you're going to be fine." And while I still carried anger and disappointment, their presence made things easier to bear. Over time, I realized my mom was never going to be the parent I needed. She was too invested in building her new life with Rob and his kids. To her, I was just a reminder of the past she wanted to move on from. So I began moving on too. If she could choose Rob over me, then I could choose myself. At least I knew I had my grandparents' support, and that was enough. That period taught me something important: how to rely on myself and when to walk away, even from people who were supposed to care. Looking back, that was probably the most valuable lesson I could have learned. When I finally graduated college, I knew it was time to take a closer look at the properties my dad had left me. The whole time I lived with my grandparents, I kept reminding myself those properties were my chance to build something. My dad had planned so carefully, so I'd have a future even if he couldn't be there. I wasn't going to let that go to waste. One of the houses he left me was the same one my mom and Rob were living in, the home I grew up in before everything fell apart. It was a solid house in a good neighborhood, perfect for renting out. So, with my degree finished and the possibility of grad school ahead, I decided it was time to renovate and prepare it for tenants. Extra income would help, and it felt like the right step. I knew I'd have to break the news to my mom, and I didn't expect it to go smoothly. Still, it had to be done. One afternoon I went over, ready to explain my plan. I intended to give her and Rob a fair timeline, so they could figure out their next move. My approach was simple, respectful, but clear. But when I knocked, no one answered. The house was silent, their car gone. I waited for a bit, thinking they were out. But it became clear they weren't coming back soon. I called my mom, left a voicemail, and even sent a text, letting her know I wanted to talk. No reply. Later, my grandma casually mentioned that my mom and Rob had gone to Florida on vacation. I was stunned. Here I was trying to have an adult conversation about my property, and they were off relaxing on a beach. I gave it a few more days, hoping she'd respond, but there was nothing. No call, no text, just silence. It felt like she was avoiding me. That left me stuck. I couldn't move forward if she kept dodging the issue. So I decided to take action. Legally, the house was mine. My name was on the deed, and I was the one paying property taxes. I had every right to manage it, so I hired a locksmith and changed the locks. I know it might sound harsh, but it was the only way to show I was serious. I couldn't keep letting them treat the place like a vacation home when I needed to move on with renovations. Walking back inside, after all those years, felt strange. The house no longer felt like mine. It was filled with my mom and Rob's things, not my family's. That only strengthened my resolve. The very next day, my phone lit up with calls. My mom was furious. I had dozens of missed calls and voicemails full of anger, demanding to know why they couldn't get inside. She accused me of disrespect and betrayal. When I finally answered, she started shouting right away. I stayed calm and told her I'd been trying to reach her for days to discuss my plans. She didn't want to hear it. She kept insisting I couldn't just kick them out, that they had nowhere else to go. I explained that I'd given her every chance, and that the house was legally mine. I told her I was planning renovations, and had already given her notice. She argued, "This is still my home. You can't take it away from me." At that moment, I realized reasoning with her wasn't possible. To her, it wasn't about legality or fairness. It was about what she believed she was entitled to. I stood firm. I told her she had 2 weeks to move out. I wasn't being heartless. I gave them time to gather their things and make arrangements. But after 2 weeks, the renovation would begin. Her response cut deep. She said coldly, "I never thought you'd do this to your own mother." As painful as it was, I knew I couldn't back down. This was about taking control of my future, even if it meant making tough choices. The next morning, when I arrived at the house to start preparing, my mom and Rob were waiting outside. Both looked furious. Rob stepped up like he wanted to intimidate me, saying, "You think you can just kick us out? You've got no right." I didn't flinch. I told him, "This isn't your house. It never was. I'm the one paying for it, and I make the decisions." He couldn't argue with that. My mom, though, started crying, saying I was heartless and leaving them with nowhere to go. She even said I was acting just like my father, but not in a kind way. It hurt, but I stayed composed. I reminded her again, they had 2 weeks. After that, the work would begin. She shook her head, tears streaming down, saying she couldn't believe how cold I was. Rob stood by, clearly frustrated but powerless. Watching my mom cry wasn't easy, and yes, I felt guilty, but I also knew if I gave in now, I'd never get them out. This was my chance to reclaim what was mine. By the time they left that day, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. A weight had been lifted, but the guilt was still there. Driving back to my grandparents' house, I knew I had to see it through, no matter how difficult it became. At first, I thought they'd accept the 2-week timeline. I figured the anger would fade, and they'd start packing, but instead, my mom chose to make it as difficult as possible. The very next day, I went back to take measurements for the renovations. I had a contractor scheduled in a few weeks, and I wanted everything ready. I was in the backyard with a notepad when the gate slammed open. My mom stormed in, yelling before I could even react. "How could you do this to us?" she screamed, her face red with anger. She accused me of betraying my own family, saying, "We have nowhere else to go. What do you expect us to do?" I tried to stay calm, even though my heart was racing. I told her, "Mom, I gave you 2 weeks. You have time to find a place. I'm not just kicking you out with no notice." But she wouldn't hear it. She kept going on about how I was selfish and how she'd sacrificed so much for me. Honestly, it stung. It felt like she was trying to guilt me for wanting my own space back. Then Rob walked in, with that same tough guy act, like he could intimidate me into changing my mind. He said, "You think you can boss us around just because you own this place? We've built a life here." I told him, "No, Rob. I built a life here. This was my dad's house, and I'm taking back what's mine." That was the last thing he wanted to hear. He got heated, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But my mom held him back, telling him to calm down. She turned back to me, eyes full of tears, and begged, "Please, we need more time. We've got nowhere else to go." Then Rob's stepdaughter, the 19-year-old, came out crying, holding her stomach. That's when my mom blurted out, "She's pregnant. You can't do this. You can't put us out when she's about to have a baby." That stopped me cold. I hadn't expected that. For a second I just stood there, unsure what to say. It felt like they were using every possible excuse to get me to back down. I did feel bad for her. She was young, and pregnancy is hard, but I knew I couldn't let that change the decision. I took a deep breath and told them, "I'm sorry she's going through this, but this is still my house. You have 2 weeks. I'm not asking you to leave today." My mom broke down crying, and Rob just stood there looking ready to explode. I couldn't stay in that moment any longer. I told them, "I've made my decision. I'll come back in 2 weeks to check in." Then I walked away. Leaving wasn't easy. I could still hear my mom shouting behind me, calling me selfish and heartless, saying she couldn't believe her own son would do this. But I had to keep walking. If I stayed, I'd start doubting myself, and I couldn't afford that. When I got back to my grandparents' place, I tried to focus on the renovation plans. I pulled up the paperwork, looked over my notes, and tried to stay focused, but it was tough. My mom's words kept playing in my head. The guilt crept in. No one wants to feel like the bad guy, especially not with family. Then my phone rang. It was an aunt I barely talked to. She said, "I heard what happened, and I'm disappointed. Your mom's in a tough spot, and you're making it worse." She kept saying I was being cruel and needed to help because that's what family does. And it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, more calls and texts came from other relatives, all saying the same thing, that I was selfish, that I should give my mom more time, or just let her stay. They acted like I was doing this for fun, like I wasn't thinking about my future at all. One evening, my grandma noticed how stressed I was. She sat me down and said, "You did what you had to do. Don't let them guilt you. Your dad left you this house for a reason." That helped, but it didn't stop the messages. The worst was a long text from another relative saying my mom was caught in the middle, and I needed to show compassion. That frustrated me. How was she caught in the middle when she chose them over me? But I didn't reply. I knew arguing wouldn't help. So I ignored the calls and texts. I figured if they were so worried about her, they could step up, offer her a place, or help her find one. But no one did. It was easier for them to blame me. Typical. As the days passed, I kept moving forward with the renovation. I met with the contractor, set up a plan, and got things in motion. I knew eventually I'd have to face my mom and Rob again, and I wasn't looking forward to it. But I reminded myself, this was for my future. Too long, I'd let others control what I could or couldn't do. It was time I took control. And honestly, even with all the drama, I started to feel better about my choice. Deep down, I knew I was doing what my dad wanted. He left me these properties to secure my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away, not even my mom. By the end of that first week, the guilt was fading. I knew I wasn't wrong. I'd given them time, and been fair. If my mom and Rob wanted to make it harder, that was on them. I just had to stay strong. When the 2 weeks were up, I prepared myself for the confrontation. I spent those days thinking through exactly what I'd say. A part of me hoped they'd have already left, but I knew that was unlikely. Based on how things had gone, I expected pushback. Sure enough, when I pulled into the driveway, my mom, Rob, and even some of their relatives were waiting. It felt staged, like they wanted an audience. My stomach sank, but I knew I had to stay calm. If I showed stress, they'd use it against me. As I walked up, my mom rushed over, crying. She went straight into an emotional speech. "I can't believe you do this to us. You're my son. How can you turn your back on me when I need you most?" If I hadn't prepared, it would have hit me hard. But I stayed calm and said, "Mom, I gave you 2 weeks. That's fair, and you know it. This is my house, and I'm taking it back." She kept saying I was being unreasonable, but I knew 2 weeks was more than enough to start looking. It was clear they hadn't even tried. They were just stalling, hoping I'd give in. Rob jumped in, fired up, saying, "This is our home. You can't just take it away." The tension rose, but I stayed steady. "Actually, I can. Legally it's mine. I've been patient, but now it's time to move out." He had no response, because he knew I was right. Then some of the relatives stepped in. One cousin started lecturing me about how family should stick together, accusing me of acting like a landlord instead of a son. She said, "Your mom did so much for you, and now you're abandoning her." It felt like everyone was ganging up, trying to paint me as the villain. I took a breath and said, "I get that you want to help, but this isn't your business. My dad left me this house for a reason. I'm doing what I need to do." She scoffed, muttered heartless, and walked away. At that point, I knew this wasn't going to be quick. They were all waiting for me to break. But I knew if I gave in, they'd never leave. Just more excuses and more drama. I had to hold my ground. My mom cried harder, saying, "We don't at Stit know where we still go. We don't at Stit have any money." I bit my tongue instead of saying what I was really thinking, that she should Stit planned better. Instead I said, "Ed Stit, I'm sorry, but I need this space back. You have to find another option." She switched tactics, asking for just one more month. I almost wavered, but I remembered this was a pattern. Another month would turn into another excuse. So I told her, "I've already given all the time I can. I can wait longer." Rob started ranting again about how I was leaving them with nothing, but I just kept repeating, "This is my house. I'm taking it back," over and over because I knew they were trying to wear me down. Then the pregnant stepdaughter came out, holding her stomach, crying. She said, "Please, I'm about to have a baby. We have nowhere to go." That was tough to hear. It's hard not to feel sympathy, but I reminded myself, this wasn't my responsibility. I said, "I'm sorry, but I've given as much time as I can. I hope you find somewhere soon." And then I walked away. My mom shouted after me that she'd never forgive me, but I didn't turn back. If I did, I knew I'd start doubting myself again. Back in my car, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Part of me felt empowered for standing my ground, but another part felt awful. It's one thing to know you're right, but another when everyone says you're wrong. I sat for a while, just breathing, trying not to let it crush me. I reminded myself that my dad left me this house for a reason. I couldn't let guilt or pressure take that away. When I finally drove off, I felt lighter. It wasn't easy, and I knew there'd be more backlash, but I'd taken the first step. I wasn't going to let their problems drag me down. That day, I threw myself back into the renovation. I met the contractor, reviewed designs, and pushed things forward. Despite the weight of everything, I knew I'd done the right thing, and I wasn't going to let anyone convince me otherwise.